اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. وعنده مفاتح الغيب لا يعلمها إلا هو يعلم ما في البر والبحر ولا تسقط من ورقة إلا يعلمها ولا حبة في ظلمات الأرض ولا رطب ولا يابس إلا في كتاب مبين. In the last lecture, we left off talking very briefly about this idea that we have two doors to our heart, to our soul. One door is open to creation, and that is the door that we're used to it being open. We're used to interacting with each other, we're used to eating, we're used to drinking, we're used to things of this world. But we also have another door to the heart that is to the celestial realms, what we call the malakut, versus the mulk, which is the world around us. And it is that door through which we receive and our spiritual inspiration. If we read a passage of the Quran, we are moved. I gave the example of Ramadan, that in Ramadan we feel something extra that we don't feel throughout the year, something spiritual that is. For those who have been fortunate to perform Hajj, you feel that when you go to Hajj, even though it's very physically very difficult, you feel something very different. So I liken it to these two doors that we have. And they have, in a way, an inverse relationship, meaning that when the door to the mulk, when the door to the world around you is open a lot, you tend not to think of spiritual things. Think of somebody that's a trader in Wall Street. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but those people that are yelling and buying and selling. I mean, the last thing on that person's mind is the meaning of Tawheed, or what does this hadith mean? They're in the here and now, the exact moment, buying and selling and trading. So they are kind of disconnected from that other stuff. And think, if you will, of your most spiritual moment. Maybe it was one of the last 10 nights of Ramadan, or maybe you went to Umrah or Hajj, or you saw the Prophet's mosque for the first time, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you sort of were in the zone. You were in this perfect, peaceful place, and you were not thinking of anything of this world. You were only thinking of these higher, lofty meanings. So you can kind of understand through these examples how in your own life you can interpret these vying experiences vis-a-vis these two doors in your heart. So I kind of left that off. And again, I reiterate this every lecture. The point is for us to provide a framework through which we can understand the spiritual sciences of Islam. So giving ourselves a scheme, terminology, a framework that we can understand our own personal journey. What I want to discuss this evening, inshallah, is another part of the literature that we find of Islamic spirituality, tazkiyah, tasawwuf, etc. is the ulama were very concerned with describing the journey itself. So we talked about the mechanics, maybe you can say, about dhikr and fiqh and the psychology of how we have a nafs and we have different levels of the nafs and how the dhikr impacts those levels, etc. Those are sort of the mechanics. It's sort of how the engine works. But there's another part of the story is, what does the journey look like? And the ulama, they understood and they looked at life as a journey. This is even the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Kun fi dunya ka'annaka gharib aw 'abir as-sabil." Be in this world as if you are a stranger or a journeyer. So the journey motif is something that is infused in Islam. The Sharia, the word Sharia means a path. The path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we call it the tariq ila Allah, the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's always this concept that we are here going somewhere to some journey. And the reason we have that, other than the fact that it comes from the Sunnah, is that it reminds us that there's a destination. So we know where we're going, which is really a blessing, because a lot of people, they don't know where they're going in life. And alhamdulillah, our faith begins with that, explaining to us, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We've come from Allah and we're returning to Him. So pretty clear where we're going. There's only one exit to this journey. And therefore, we have certain stops along the way. So for the person that is concerned with their spiritual life, for the person that wants to focus on bettering themselves, for the person that wants to take some of the things that we talked about and implement them, the ulama said, take notice that you will go through these different stations. You will have these different stops along the way. And in the language of tazkiyah, these are called the maqamat, the different stations that you have. And this is a huge literature. I mean, I'm not even going to say scratching the surface. This is really just a sketch of what this is about, because we don't, in the current format, there's no time to go into depth, maybe later. But the ulama, it's very common to find books that will explain what are those different stops along the way. From the time somebody starts this journey to the end of that journey, what are those different stops called? Those rest stops. So they would usually begin with the first stop, which would either be waking up, al-yaqadha, making the assumption that we're all spiritually asleep, and that we need to wake up to the fact that we have to do this, and or tawbah. So the beginning of this journey, as one would rationally argue, begins with repentance. That let us stop and repent for the things that we've done in the past and begin a new chapter with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then move forward. And then they will say, and then you will pass on these other stops. So let me give you 10 that are kind of popular, not in any particular order. So, repentance is sort of in the beginning, but there will be one stop will be asceticism, az-zuhd. So you come to this understanding that you need to lessen your attachment to worldly things. So there'll be a lot of pages that talk about what that means, and stories of the awliya and the saints and the sahaba and the tabi'een, and stories of the Prophet ﷺ about zuhd, to encourage and inculcate this as a value. Patience. So you get very excited in the beginning, but then you start to get frustrated that, oh my God, I have so much to do, I have so much work to do. So there'll be a station or a chapter about patience, the virtue of patience. And you'll find verses about patience, hadith about patience, stories about patience. Then there'll be a chapter or a station about poverty. And here, not necessarily poverty in the material sense, but poverty in the spiritual sense. That you come to the realization that we are all impoverished when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't have anything. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There's no power or ability except in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even my own attempt to reach Allah is an ability that Allah has given me in the first place. So the fact that I'm remembering, the fact that we're here, that we're talking about this, Allah has given us this ability to remember Him. And when you think about that and you reflect upon that, sometimes it's so overwhelming. There's no other way to describe it as you are poor and naked in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there'll be that's a station, that realization. Gratefulness. To be grateful. لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. If you are grateful, I will give you more. So that's another station along the way. Is not to forget to be grateful for what you have. So there'll be chapters and pages and stories about gratitude. Fear. Not to forget that there can be punishment for those that sin and don't repent. That there is something called the hellfire. That there are things that are called sins. And we believe that sins can open us to punishment, God forbid, on the Yawm al-Qiyamah. So there's a lot of literature about fear, but fear that motivates us to do good, not fear that's sort of depressing, but fear to sort of waken us up to the fact that I don't want to get messed up. I don't want to fall like those people. And then fear, the chapter or the station after that will be about hope, to remind us that we are between these two sentiments always, that we have fear of Allah Ta'ala, but we have hope and love of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tawakkul. These are just some, so on and so forth. So the most famous writing of this is the book Manazil al-Sa'irin, which was commented on by Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi in 3 volumes, and I just discovered recently that that whole thing has been translated into English, and it's coming out, I think, in the first part of this coming year. Unfortunately by Brill, so it's going to be very expensive. I think each volume is a couple $100, and the whole thing is like a couple $100. But the reason I mentioned that, other than the fact that it's accessible in English, is that Ibn Qayyim, as many of us know, is one of the favorite authors of people that are more of a Salafi slant of Islam. And the fact that Ibn Qayyim has this the Manazil al-Sa'irin book is like a little pamphlet, but he has a 3-volume commentary on all of these stations. There are all of the stations between Iyaka na'budu wa Iyaka nasta'in. That's how the author al-Harawi, rahimahullah, wrote the book, or the little booklet. So the fact that Ibn Qayyim wrote about it, this is something that is, nobody in the Ummah, in the Sunni world at least, is going to critique this book. No one's going to say, oh, this is a Sufi book, or this is just, everyone's going to accept this book. And there's a very, very important topic, these different stations along the way, because these are the states that you go through in your own journey. It might not be so straight the way the book is written or the way that I've enumerated them. You might jump around. But it's important that we recognize that what we experience in our spiritual life, all of that has been documented. The ulama documented all of that stuff to explain to us the type of emotional sentiments that we will have as we try to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or God forbid, as we fall further away from Him. So all of these things have been documented, have been mentioned. And again, we really can't do the topic justice other than to make you aware that this is a critical part of our spiritual sciences. And that the bulk, even though the other stuff I spent a lot of time on, from a literature point of view, the stuff that I'm talking about today, this is the stuff that has the bulk of the literature. Books like the Ihya al-Din, things like these stations, these maqamat. This is the bulk of the spiritual literature is about this stuff. Not about the levels of the self and the dhikr impacting on the self. But the reason I wanted to highlight that is I want people to understand the mechanism that's happening inside us that Islam recognizes that takes us down this journey. Because I think if you don't know what's happening, then it's difficult to understand why this type of literature is important. So again, this is something that these books are very easy to read. They're very fun to read. They're full of stories. Other than the Quran and the Sunnah definitions in the beginning, they're full of stories, wonderful stories. Hillat al-Awliya of Asfahani, this like encyclopedic documentation of the awliya of the Salaf and how they live their lives. These are very wonderful stories. Many of these things have been translated. These little books have been translated in English to talk about these stories. And now you know why. So when you go to a bookstore or you find these books of stories of saintly people, you know where this falls in our paradigm of Islamic knowledge and why we have these stories. And I want to say one thing about these stories before I move on to the next topic, which is when you read stories of saintly people, forget about the stories of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, because that falls in the category of Sunnah. So the stories of the Prophet ﷺ, of course, and then the Sahaba, what we benefit from them is we follow that action. عليكم بسنتي وسنة الخلفاء الراشدين المهديين من بعدي عضوا عليها بالنواجذ. The Prophet ﷺ said, you follow my sunnah and the sunnah of the rightly guided caliphs after me, hold to it with your wisdom teeth, meaning like all the way back, bite onto it and don't let go. So that's a different category. But everyone after that, from the Tabi'in till today, the reason we have these stories and we have a tradition of hagiography, of writing biographies of saintly people, is not to imitate what those saintly people did, but is to demonstrate for us what can happen when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows on somebody His favor from their practice of Islam. So when you read a story, I'll tell you a personal example. I can't remember the sheikh's name, but there was this like Iraqi sheikh of the previous generation, and one of my teachers told me this story, is that every time the head of state would call him into his office He would walk into the office, give his back to the head of state, face the Qibla, and pray 2 rak'ahs. So I said, why would he do that? And he said, well, the Sheikh said it's a sunnah to remember Allah where Allah's name is not mentioned. And he would like say that, you know. But that was like his, Allah inspired. So, and then the Sheikh, he like saw the smirk on my face. He said, but you can't do that. He said, because that comes from him. You can't imitate that. That story is just to show you how when Allah overtakes somebody and they want to make a stand for the truth, how they make the stand. And the same Sheikh was telling me another story about one of his teachers, and he said he was never asked for money. Anytime he was asked for money, he would put his hand in his pocket, and whatever he had, he would give without counting it. And I said to him, yeah, that's tough. I don't know if I can. That's really tough because I always know how much I have. It's very little, and it's always spoken for, right? So he said, again, like I told you before, not for you to do, but for you to see how when somebody lives the sunnah of the Prophet was never asked, and he said no. This is one of his traits, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this story is to show you a manifestation of that, not that you follow it. So when you read these stories, it doesn't mean that you have to live like them. You don't have to give up all your clothing and like Ibrahim al-Adham and just go out and, you know, wander into the forest of the Shenandoah. You don't have to do that. But you can see how people took this stuff seriously. That they didn't allow anything to get in their way of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the point of the story. So I just want to say that as sort of a disclaimer, that as people read more, I want people to understand the right things from the stories. Anyway, now I want to move, sort of shift gears a little bit to another topic, which is what are the rules that govern our journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm going to go over 7 rules, and these are, again, this is its own topic, has its own literature. There are books that, many books that talk about this, so I'm just, again, giving you a sample of this. If you followed everything we have said, and you say to yourself, okay, I want to, take my relationship with Allah seriously, I want to really make a go at it, and I want to improve myself, etc. What are some of the overarching rules, principles that should guide your journey? The first is absolute adherence to the Sharia and sound belief. Imam al-Junayd, who was, from the generation of the Salaf, who is one of the originators of this science of tasawwuf, he said, "طريقنا هذا مقيد بالكتاب والسنة." Our way is guarded and is confined by the Quran and the Sunnah. So there's nothing in Islam that can be of Islam if it's not based on the Quran and the Sunnah. Which means that it doesn't matter what we say, it doesn't matter the circumstance that we're in. When it comes to this stuff, especially this stuff, we always go back and where is our touchstone from the Quran and the Sunnah? That's where our guidance is. And everything has to be balanced on that. If some sheikh, you meet some sheikh, or you hear a lecture, or you have these stories in the back of your mind and they sound weird, all you have to do is weigh it in the balance of the Quran and the Sunnah. If it's in the Quran and the Sunnah, then you understand where it comes from. If it's not, then it's not from the Quran and the Sunnah. It's as simple as that. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. But your journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you're in the tent of Islam, can't progress and can't be effective unless it's based on the Quran and the Sunnah. I can't emphasize that enough. That's the most important thing. That whatever you have experienced in life, you will always find the answer in the Quran and the Sunnah. Why? Because part of our belief is that there is nothing that the Prophet ﷺ did not inform us of, or there is nothing that we need except that the Prophet ﷺ informed us of. And there is nothing that can harm us except that he warned us about. And that's the meaning of the verse, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. That which the Prophet ﷺ has given you, take, and that which he has forbidden you from, stay away from. So a cardinal belief that we have as Muslims is that everything we need in this life vis-a-vis this life and the hereafter is in Islam, is in the Quran and the Sunnah. Nothing is missing. It's not like the Prophet, oh, I forgot to tell them about this thing. No, it doesn't exist. Everything we need, we have, which is really a blessing if you think about it. And this shows you the flexibility of Islam, because another necessary belief from that is we believe that Islam is valid for all time, all place, all circumstance. So therefore, the Quran and the Sunnah, we look at as principles, as primary principles from which we derive meanings for the here and now, which means that our understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah evolves with time, can change with time, place, and circumstance, but the Quran and the Sunnah don't change. Okay, so that's also part of it. Anyway, so absolute adherence to the Sharia and sound belief. Number 2 is God is the goal. The goal of this path, of your spiritual path, is to have a clearer relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's exactly what the Prophet said. And ta'bud Allah ka'annaka taraf in lam takun taraf fahuwa yarak, the hadith that we began this whole lecture series with. You have no other reason, no other goal from doing any of the stuff we're talking about except to reach this relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have no worldly goal, you have no monetary goal, there's nothing of that whatsoever. This is purely to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason this is so important is that it's very easy, it's very, very easy when you start taking this stuff seriously to start to see yourself better than everybody else. You know, you come to the mosque and be like, oh, they don't know that I was up all night praying. Shaitan loves this kind of stuff. He loves to come in and ruin all of this stuff by this arrogance. And the reason this principle is so important is that that's not the reason why we do this. That's not the reason why you pray. That's not the reason why you read the Quran. You don't read the Quran so you can get dunya. You read the Quran because this is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You pray for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't pray because of somebody else. And this is the reason this is a principle. You have to constantly remind yourself. Constantly remind yourself. Allah is the goal. And then therefore, you solve many of these problems that many worshippers have. Many people, they have this problem. You walk into the mosque and you forget to pray like the sunnah. And then somebody walks in and they pray the sunnah. You're like, oh, I should pray the sunnah, I forgot. Oh, what if I stand up now? Or am I standing up because the other person, I want the other person to see me pray? Oh, I'm not going to do that because I don't want anyone to see that. And you start confusing yourself. Maybe not you, but people are like that. But then you remember Allah is the goal. Then everything becomes clear. You don't think about anybody else. You don't care what people are saying about you, how they're looking at you. You're doing what needs to be done. At that moment, Allah inspired you to, grab the Mus'haf and read it. Read it. Allah inspired you, tomorrow I'm going to fast. Fast. Allah inspired you that you're going to donate, half your paycheck this month to the mosque. Do it. Don't stop. Why? Because Allah is your goal. Don't let humanity block you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah is the goal. That's a very important principle. Number 3 is the lessening of speech, sleep, food, and social interaction. And there's a lot of literature about this. Again, this has to do with the 2 doors that we talked about. Speech, sleep, food, and social interaction. So speech, the Salaf were obsessed with silence. There's even a book called Kitab al-Samt, the book of being quiet. And there's a whole sub-literature in the spiritual sciences that talk about the dangers of the tongue, the prohibitions of the tongue, the things that the tongue can do that gets us in trouble. Backbiting and lying and boasting, all of the things that we can do from our speech. So the less you speak, the idea is the less you open yourself up to making a fool of yourself or to making something wrong. Now, this doesn't mean that you walk around, like you're silent and mute and you can't speak. That's, again, people take this the wrong way. Here's lessening. So you'll find stories, for example, of these great pious people of the past. They wouldn't speak unless they would balance what they were about to say, if it's good for their akhirah or bad for their akhirah. You find these type of stories, again, to understand how people implemented this. And then you come to the conclusion that, we speak a lot. And we're so afraid of silence. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and it goes silent and then you feel obliged to say something to plug in the silence? Right? We're so scared of that silence. Have you ever tried to be silent? Like not speak for a day or an afternoon? It's impossible. We're so scared by that notion of being silent. But when you focus on what you're saying, then you start to realize everything I say is going to have some weight on my scale, Yawm al-Qiyamah. So do I really need to say this? Or what I'm about to say, is it going to help me or not help me? And you can become obsessed with that idea. You can be obsessed with that concept all in itself. Another way of looking at it for us today, for example, is social media. Because that's an extension of our tongue. It's an extension of our expression, of our speech. The things that we say online, the comments that we make, the reposts that we repost without reading. So, bro, we have something between us. Something not silly. But seriously, all of that, I wasn't talking about that. All of that stuff, that will have, that's part of our expression. Is it going to help us or harm us? All of the criticizing that people are doing right now, of Muslims of each other, all these exposés, and all of this self-righteousness, all of this stuff, all of these people that are supporting political candidates, as if these political candidates are the Mahdi. All that stuff is going to come back Yawm al-Qiyamah. And for the person that remembers rule number 2, that Allah is the goal, they will be terrified by that idea. But for people that are heedless, are forgetful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that all they see is the here and now, then they feel that they have to comment and they have to post and they have to do this, and if I'm not posting and if I'm not tweeting and if I'm not commenting, then I'm going to be forgotten and I'm not going to get influencer, boom, boom. They keep going. They're not thinking about what the speech is. They're not thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is not their goal. You see, that's the idea of that rule, is that becomes not the goal. But if Allah is front and center, then you start to ask yourself, okay, do I really need to get involved in this talk? Do I really need to get involved in this debate? How many times could we have saved ourselves enormous amounts of trouble by just being quiet? Family disputes. In my own family, years and years and years of nonsense, all because somebody said something the wrong way at the wrong time, and it's like a wound. I'll never forgive so-and-so, I'll never talk to so-and-so, and we're never going to go to their wedding, and it's on the verge really of what's haram. We're family, by the way, okay? And we all have the same stuff. We all have the same stuff. And the Prophet ﷺ said, will the people be dragged into the hellfire except by the harvest of their tongues? This is a very vivid hadith, meaning that the only thing that will drag people, may Allah protect us, into the hellfire is the harvest, what their tongues, what their speech and their expression have brought them. So lessening of speech, again, I'm not saying you have to be mute. I'm not saying don't get involved, but I'm saying that we can lessen the speech. Sleep. This has to do more with oversleeping than, I only have to sleep 2 hours a day. We're not talking about that. But the idea is that when you sleep and you sleep in, you're missing the prayer, you're missing the Fajr prayer, for example. You're groggy when you wake up. So it's very common that you'll find literature about staying up a little bit at night to pray the tahajjud or sleeping less. And this is very subjective as well. It really depends how old people are. And, some people, they just need their sleep, and that's fine. But some people overdo it. Food, the lessening of food, I think this makes sense because we all fast, alhamdulillah. And we survive. Every year we still do it. So we're still standing, nothing happened, right? Many of us might even eat more in Ramadan than outside of Ramadan. Right? We have this, I gotta keep eating before sahur or before Fajr. But the thing is, when you eat, you clog the door that is to the malakut. That's the idea behind it. Your body, your physical body is going to hold on to your spiritual heart more intensely. Many people that don't eat, that are like vegetarian and vegan, I'm not advocating, any of that, but a lot of what they say is they talk about the lightness that they feel by not eating meat. Which is why even in our own literature, when there's people that talk about seclusion, about khalwa, you will find that some of the benefits of the seclusion is that you don't eat meat or poultry, or you eat only like a vegetarian diet for the time in which you are in the khalwa for that reason. So that's real. And there are some hadith that talk about that. But here the idea is just to eat less. Maybe you don't need to have 3 sandwiches, maybe you have 2. Maybe you don't have to have 5 meals, just 3. Or to not snack, but to lessen what you eat, to discipline yourself that you can say no. And here we're talking about lessening food in general, not fasting, which is something altogether. And then social interaction. And this comes from the seclusion of the Prophet ﷺ before his revelation, when he would go to the mountain, into the cave of Hira, and he would take with him food and drink and supplies, and he would go and he would sit by himself in the mountain, and that's when Gabriel came to him at the beginning with the revelation. So this is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, again, for some periods of time. This is not saying you shouldn't talk with people or have friends, but you can take some time out to recalibrate yourself and to lessen the social gathering. There are some people that they just chase the social gatherings. They're in the social scene all the time. People like that, they can benefit for skipping a few of those and just learning to be by yourself, or being with your family, or doing something extra, reading, or whatever the case may be. Okay? So this is rule number 3, that you will find a lot of literature that talks about the lessening of these things as a way to facilitate one's spiritual progress. Number 4 is persistence and consistency. The Prophet ﷺ, he said in Sahih al-Bukhari, the best of actions are those that are consistent, even they are few. So spiritual progress necessitates discipline, necessitates consistency. It necessitates that you pick an act and you continue doing it forever. Not that, okay, I'm so motivated, I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to pray 100 rak'ahs and I'm going to read half the mushaf. If you do that tonight, I guarantee you will not do anything for the rest of the year. It's too much. That's not the way. The way is small steps. And when you pick something that you decide to do, only pick one thing that you can commit to doing. I'm going to read half a page of the Quran every day. That's easy. You can do that. You can do that from your phone. It won't take you more than 10 minutes. That's something you can commit to. That's much, much better than going all out for like a night or 2. And then you won't be able to sustain yourself. Number 5 is the one who glances will not arrive, and multafit la yasir, meaning that the person that takes their eye off of the goal will not arrive at their goal. And the dunya has a lot of things that want us to glance at, whether they be situations or events or the news or material things or whatever the case may be, people. There's a lot of things grabbing our attention. If you're a serious person and you're serious about your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then everything is going to fall behind that goal. And you're not going to be looking left and right, or else you'll never arrive. And we all can understand this because we all drive and we all go places. So, imagine if you had to fly to London and the pilot is like, oh, look, that looks nice, cruises off to Newfoundland, and then after that, oh, let's go to Greece and Greenland and then Iceland. You'll never arrive. You arrive like months later, right? What do we want? A direct flight, preferably with no layovers. That's how you choose it, direct. It's called a direct flight. The shortest distance between 2 points is a line, a direct line. So same thing with our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want a direct line. We don't want to be so preoccupied by the world around us, including ourselves. So the person that starts to see, oh look, mashallah, I'm doing all this extra stuff and I'm praying and I'm fasting and you've missed the point. The point is not to look at yourself, because Allah has facilitated that for you. Your point is to keep your eye on the goal. Number 6 is advancing in the path is a product of purity of intention. So there are people that try to do this, all the time, but they flounder. And then there's somebody who you might think is, not a very pious or practicing Muslim, and then overnight their life is transformed. And that's a function of their being sincere. So this is not a game in which we weigh quantity. It's about quality. So we ask Allah Ta'ala always for our pure intention in our worship of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. That is what will have a salvatory effect on us, not the quantity. Again, it doesn't matter how much we pray and how much outside of the necessity, the quantity doesn't matter. It matters the quality. And the quality for us is a function of our intention and how we do it. And then lastly, is to remember that the path to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is one. There's one path to Allah Ta'ala in Islam. Everything that we're talking about, this is part of our faith. When Gabriel came to ask the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ answered this question. And he told us that this is the way. We're just sort of explaining it. So it's important that we keep in mind that we're all on this path together. We're all on this road together if we're Muslim, whether we're aware of it or not. But sometimes people look like they're going different ways. And that perception comes from our own ignorance. But the path in its essence is the same. We're all Muslim. We're all following the Quran. We're all following the Sunnah of the Prophet. That's what matters. And that's what we have to remember. All these differences and these groupings, and when we start fighting with each other, this is from us. This is from the nafs. This is not from Allah and not from the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, I'll leave it there. Next time we'll talk about the actual components of the path, sort of how one actually does all this stuff, and some other subtopics. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Any questions or concerns?
I have a question, since nobody's asking. Earlier you said that only do what's in the Quran and the Sunnah. But then there are things in today's world, birthdays, for example. So, I don't think they're necessarily Quran and Sunnah. But they're innocent enough. So
So I meant the things that we do in our spiritual life.
Oh, spiritual. Okay.
That's something specific. But even that is in the Quran and the Sunnah. Because the Prophet ﷺ told us and taught us the importance of civic holidays. So the Prophet ﷺ participated in a celebration called the Day of Bu'ath, which was a pre-Islamic battle that happened in Medina that the Medina Arabs celebrated. So the Prophet ﷺ celebrated it with them. And from this story, we learned that all of these there are something called civic holidays. So the holidays are not just Eid and the Mawlid and Islamic New Year, but there are civic days, 4th of July, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, Thanksgiving, Earth Day. All these things are things that we should participate because they remind us that there is another identity that we have that is larger than just our faith, which is sort of, in this case, the human race. All of these things, yeah. So even that's in, but I was talking about something else specific. How are you?
I'll ask a question.
Good?
A lot of what you talk about sounds to me like focusing on the vertical, your relationship with Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. How do you have any advice for balancing the horizontal relationship with others and our responsibilities and for worldly matters?
I mean, there's a lot of horizontal connections. There's the family. And of course, we have an obligation first and foremost to our immediate family and those that are under our care. So none of this is going to work if you're avoiding that. I mean, all of this pre-assumes that you're doing the things that you need to do. This is sort of how do I get better at me? But you can't get better at me if you're not taking care of all of your obligations. So that's that's like entry level stuff. And you have to be extremely aggressive in your life. I mean, Islam is not advocating like this passive, sit in the mosque life at all. The people before us were extremely aggressive and very, very competitive. I mean, look at the civilizations they built, and they left us.
What do you mean by aggressive?
I mean that you should be as aggressive with the dunya, your dunya life, as you are trying to be as aggressive with your akhirah life. For us, there's no contradiction between the two, because the dunya, you have to live in the dunya to get to the akhirah. You can't get into the akhirah despite the dunya. So we don't have this idea of original sin, that therefore all pleasure and all worldly things are bad. That's not our narrative. Our narrative is to take as much from the dunya as Allah gives you, but don't let it consume you inside, which is why we have the stuff that we're talking about. So we should be trying to excel at what we do. We should be trying to further our field. We should be trying to further ourselves. There's nothing that kind of competition, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it can be wrong if we approach it the wrong way, but there's nothing antithetical to Islamic in that. I know that we inherit, for some reason, this idea that religion is anti this world. But we have to remember that that's a very Christian notion. That's not or even a dharmic notion. That's not an Islamic notion at all. The Prophet, remember this hadith, the Prophet said, if the hour is about to come, if you see the angel about to blow in the trumpet, meaning the game is over, not your game, but the whole game, the big G is over, and in your hand is a seed, plant the seed. I mean, that's the attitude that we have to have. I'm going to build, I'm going to make, I'm going to advance as much as I can, because this is one of the reasons why Allah created. And I'm going to do that and say subhanallah. And I'm going to do that and I'm going to say alhamdulillah. I'm going to do that and I'm going to say la ilaha illallah. I'm not going to do that and let that block me. I'm not going to do that and look at it and be like, look how great I am. I'm going to do that and be like, Allah accept this from me. Right? So Abraham and Ismail, they built the Kaaba and they asked Allah to accept that act from them, but they still built it. So we want to build and ask that Allah accept what we build. That's that metaphor. So I want us to be like aggressive. Maybe that's the wrong word, but you know what I mean, right? Excel. Yeah. Aggressive too. We gotta be aggressive, right? Life is too short. You gotta go and get it like that. Inshallah. With the halal, but still can be a little pushy. It's okay.
A lot of the imams do teach that this dunya is miserable for the believer.
That's because they're miserable. Honestly, wallahi.
And it's really like a very common belief in a lot of the massages and a lot of teaching. And Muslims believe that this dunya should be miserable. Or it is miserable until you get to, because we're working for the akhirah. And this is a big problem, I think, and of course that repels a lot of people from wanting to associate it.
Let's put it this way, right? If you were at work or you were at school and you were asked to make a project, you would want to present the project as best as you can, either to get a good mark or to get a promotion. You're not gonna do it half-half. You're gonna do it the best you can if you knew a lot was riding on it. Now imagine that all of our acts, all of our deeds are mini projects that are being presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why would I present him something half-half? But rather, I would want to show him, look, ya Allah, this mosque that we built in Potomac. The heart of the world in which Allah, your name is not mentioned. And look, we even put these nice little benches outside, and we have this, the handicap parking, and we're Muhsin compliant, so we want the mosque accessible to everyone. Allah, we did this for you. Versus the other mosques where you walk in the mosque and there are date seeds, on the carpet. And this act is literally being presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we speak. And because of this concept, the people before us, they did things with beauty. I mean, when you go to the Muslim world, like the ancient Muslim world, places like Amman and Damascus and Cairo and Istanbul and Fez, you see the beauty of what these people built. They didn't have to make all these little things in the mosque. They could have just made the wall, right? But they made all these little, whatever they're called, the concave designs, so it looks beautiful. So that when you see it, you see La ilaha illallah. And in the souk, they would put benches, so old people in the marketplace, they had a place to rest. And in the hospitals, they would have a trust, money that was entrusted to pay for somebody to sit in the hospital around the rooms in which the elderly were dying, just to say funny stories and nice stories, so that their spirit would be lifted as they pass from this world into the next. So they didn't see this as frivolous, but they saw this as ihsan. Inna Allah katabat ihsan ala kulli shay. The Prophet said Allah has demanded excellence on everything. Excellence on how we dress, excellence in how we eat, excellence in how we live. So, why not? But we do this by remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't do this to take us away. I'm not talking about we need the latest bling. I'm talking about beauty and excellence. Aesthetically, the ulama before us were handsome. And were Imam Malik, you would see him and you would think he was like the king of Medina or something. So this is the attitude that we have to really revive. Because like you said, unfortunately, people think Islam is ugly. And if you see somebody and they make you think Islam is ugly, astaghfirullah, maybe it's because they're ugly on the inside. But Islam is Allahu Jameelun yuhibbul jamal. The Prophet ﷺ, Allah is beautiful, He loves that which is beauty. One of our teachers, the imma that I wear, not this one, but the imma has like a lining on the inside. And he would make sure that the lining of his imma was the same color as his socks and the lining of his jubba. And my shaykh asked him, well, why would you do that? No one sees the lining of the imma. It's like all sweat and stuff. Well, who cares? And he said, Allahu Jameelun yuhibbul jamal. Allah's beauty, He loves that which is beautiful. So when you have that in your heart, when you understand that as a principle, then you will see that we have an obligation to make Islam beautiful. Right? We have an obligation to the little things matter. The little things matter because Allah is seeing all of this stuff. Yeah, so let's make Islam beautiful.
I think the important to make a distinction between someone doing something in this life to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing wrong with it. You mentioned about what was done in Islam in the previous period, design, succeed in engineering and science, etc. All of it's good. Because as a Muslims, we're supposed to exceed in our life. There's someone who do something and go behind this life, and it might take him away from the hereafter.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
So this is, I think, the distinction between the sister, what she's asking. So if the goal of I'm going to follow this life and do what I can, it might take me away from the hereafter. This is a problem why one needs to be careful. What's the intention? Is my intention to follow this life and achieve everything at the expense of the hereafter and the expense of Islam? We're young. We came here in this country, there are so many things there, and someone might deviate. So the intention here, yes, I'm pursuing science and doing something, but if it's going to take me away from my religion, that's the intention.
Yep.
There's someone I'm coming here and excelling what I do and go say, the Muslim Ummah, this is I think what I'm
Yeah. Anybody else?
You said that Quran is the same, but the understanding.
The what?
Quran is the same, but the understanding you want to change it.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
The Quran is Allah's speech. That's not going to change. Surah Al-Ikhlas is Surah Al-Ikhlas. But how can I understand that? I'm finite. We're all finite. We're human. So our understanding of the Quran is always going to be limited to our intellect, limited to what we know of the world around us, limited to what was written before us. So the meanings of the Quran are endless. And because the meanings of the Quran are endless, because it is the eternal speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means that our understanding of the Quran is also going to be endless. That each generation can understand something that maybe we don't understand today. In addition, that when I bring the meaning of the Quran and I apply it into the dunya, into the here and now, the here and now changes. It changes with time and place and people and circumstance. So the way I apply the Quran and the Sunnah in the here and now can change with the different people, time and circumstance. So our circumstance now is not the circumstance of the Sahaba. The food that we eat now is not the food of the Sahaba. The Sahaba were physically stronger than we were. We're like weaklings. We barely walk from the car here and carry the bag. The Sahaba are going to get water from the well and fighting with their hands and things like that. So the physical life was different. All of that's going to impact how we apply Islam, how we apply the Quran and the Sunnah, which is its own topic altogether. But this is the discipline of usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh helps us understand how we apply the Quran and the Sunnah given those parameters. So, for example, the whole riba conversation we've been talking about the last couple of years in the mosque. The nature of money today is not the nature of money even 50 years ago or 60 years ago. It's definitely not the nature of money at the time of the Sahaba. So we have to understand the nature of money today to be able to understand if the interest that we're talking about in the bank, this is riba that's in the Quran and the Sunnah, or it's not riba in the Quran and the Sunnah. The verses about riba in the Quran are never going to change. But the transaction that we have now might not be the same transaction that we think was at the time of the Prophet, etc., etc., etc. And this applies for all of the other things, especially in public life. In the spiritual life, the acts of worship, wudu, and prayer, not much is going to change. But in the way we live our life together, a lot will change. That's how Islam becomes valid every time, for every age, because we have this mechanism that we're talking about.
But you have to be careful as to who integrates.
Oh yeah, of course, you have to be trained to do that. Not anybody can. This is not an excuse just to be like, I want to do, this is my version of Islam. No, you have to use the principles of fiqh to be able to do that.
So the beauty, for instance, of the Islamic world is in fact to promote deeper understanding. The Al-Azhar of 50 years ago, right, was thinking there, and Al-Azhar thinking now, depending on who's into it.
Yeah, sure. It's a huge responsibility on these, not just the Azhar, but all these other institutions of Sunni learning. And now the situation is so rapidly changing that what's happening is we have these international bodies that are convening. Like the OIC, they have a fiqh council in Jeddah. There are other fiqh councils in Europe. There are other, fiqh council that's set up in the Emirates. There's the fiqh council that's set up in Egypt. So all of these groups, these bodies, they convene people and muftis and ulama from different countries to talk about, it's not the most effective thing, but I've been to many of these gatherings, and they talk about, on a high level, a lot of these issues. So because one of the problems is that the rapid progression of life is not affecting specific geographies, not affecting everyone. So you can't have some guy in Pakistan give one fatwa and some guy in Morocco give the opposite fatwa, and they're contemporaries. It's not going to work. So you can't have the Qadi in Pakistan saying, bank interest is haram, and then the Mufti of Egypt, as we say in Egypt, bank interest is not riba. That's where we're going to have these clashes. So these international bodies, one of the functions of them is to try to iron these things out. Again, it's not super efficient. You've seen the difficulty we have in managing the Eid prayer at ICCP and parking, right, in Ramadan. Can you imagine having to manage all of these egos and all of these big ulama? It's tough.
Just to add to your point, we were younger 30 years ago in our countries. The imams were probably not even past their high school studies. easiest job that they could get, or there was no other job than that.
Yeah,
And now you get graduates, and their thinking is much more advanced. And therefore, I think there's a responsibility in the Muslim world for us to be able to inculcate better thinking, and it's Allah's work.
yeah. I mean, that's a bigger problem.
Yes.
That's unfortunately. Sorry, sisters and brothers, just give me 5 minutes, and I'll wrap up. Is that with the colonial, experience? One of the impacts of the colonial experience is that there became this new position of civil government. So now I can go to a trade school or a foreign language school. I can get a foreign language degree, and I'm guaranteed a job in the government. And the civil government is so big, and job security. So there's a brain drain from the middle of the 19th century, even till today, that the smartest and elite families want their children to have foreign education, and so they can get either a job in the government or a job in these multinational companies. So what ends up happening is that peasants and farmers and these families, as you said, the only education that's open to them is quote unquote religious education. So they go to religious education, they memorize the Quran, they have some basic grammar in Arabic or whatever the case may be, and then they're like an imam somewhere if they're lucky. But that religious education doesn't give them foreign language education, doesn't, now it does, but it didn't. It didn't teach them the quote unquote secular sciences, so you have this gap. So what ends up happening is the people that speak French and speak English and speak Portuguese, these are the elite, enlightened people. They even dress differently, and then the other people are simple farmers. But then the simple farmer, he becomes like the mufti or something like that. So then you have this huge gap. So unfortunately, this situation has been sort of forced on us. It was not naturally like that because the Sharia sciences are very complicated. They're very advanced. I did not study simple stuff at Muslim. I studied very advanced things, plus my Western education. So the gap is closing, alhamdulillah, but the damage is still done, and we have a long way to go. But yeah, we have an obligation to do this because, as I was saying, for all of the reasons that you mentioned. Okay, it's prayer time.